The lock clicked and refused to turn no matter how many times Alex tried. At first, he thought it was a glitch. He pulled out his phone and opened the control app for his smart lock system. The interface was blank. No response. Confused, he tried the backup keycard. Nothing. When he looked closer, his jaw clenched. The entire smart lock unit had been ripped out and replaced with a cheap metal deadbolt that looked like it belonged on a discount storage locker. Taped to the center of his door was a printed paper with the HOA letterhead and an absurd statement. Your home access has been revoked due to multiple violations. Violations Alex had never received, heard of, or even imagined could exist. He stood there, stunned, staring at the door of his own house, locked out, humiliated, and blindsided. Neighbors peeked through blinds across the street. One of them made eye contact and immediately ducked out of view. It wasn't just a lock. This was a coordinated move. Someone had gone inside his home without his permission and changed his entire entry system while he was at work. And he already knew exactly who had the ego and the audacity to do it. The day had started like any other. Alex had brewed his coffee, fed his cat Pixel, and left for the security firm where he worked as a systems analyst. He was in charge of designing secure networks and physical entry protections for high-value clients, including several government contracts. If anyone understood how to gain or block access, it was him. Which made it even more absurd that someone thought they could outmaneuver him on his own turf. Karen Whitmore, the self-declared queen of the HOA, had always hated his presence in the neighborhood. Too many wires, too many blinking lights on his discreet battery cabinet, too much independence. Her campaign to micromanage the community had grown bolder in the past months, but Alex never thought it would escalate to this level of insanity. He had received a few passive-aggressive letters before about his front yard tech box being unsightly, but it was legal and concealed. He had responded politely. Apparently, that wasn't enough. Alex took a deep breath and calmly walked away from the door. He didn't yell. He didn't bang on the lock or call the police in a panic. He was used to systems, and this was just another one to dismantle. He drove to a nearby cafe and opened his laptop. The first thing he checked was the camera feed offline. But he had designed his home surveillance to back up automatically to an encrypted server. Within minutes, he pulled up a video showing Karen standing in front of his door in broad daylight, pointing while a man in a generic work van removed the original smart lock. Her voice was audible through his hidden microphone inside the outdoor planter. She was instructing him on how to disable the internal wiring before replacing it. She even had the nerve to say make it look legal enough so he doesn't have a case. Alex let out a low chuckle. They really had no idea who they were messing with. He considered going straight to the police, but Karen would claim HOA authority and tie it up in bureaucracy. What he needed was more than just revenge. He wanted precision. He wanted exposure. He made a few calls to close friends in the legal and cybersecurity world, laying out the situation while collecting the timestamps, metadata, and full-resolution video backup. He then called a locksmith. Not to break in, but to prepare for a legal re-entry once he had his documentation straight. Meanwhile, he spent the night at his friend Miguel's house, quietly planning his next move while enjoying a late dinner and pretending nothing was out of the ordinary. Back in the neighborhood, Karen was already spreading her version of the story. According to her, Alex had violated the HOA's visual standards and was harboring unauthorized surveillance technology. She even claimed to have voted on an emergency resolution allowing the HOA to restrict access to any home in violation. Several neighbors, confused but intimidated by her energy, nodded along. They didn't realize that Karen hadn't held a real vote, didn't file any actual paperwork, and was making up policies on the fly. She thought her position made her untouchable. That assumption was going to end very soon. The next morning, Alex walked past his house casually and placed a small unassuming device behind a brick planter near the door. It looked like a weed sensor, but it was actually a short-range directional antenna that would begin monitoring signal interference and tracking any attempts to connect to the home's new dummy system. Karen had removed the surface-level tech, but she couldn't touch what she didn't understand. The deeper levels of Alex's system were still active and cloaked. He had built redundancies into every piece of his infrastructure. If someone tampered with one layer, the others would react, and now they were gathering data. By mid-afternoon, he was ready to confront the HOA. He printed out copies of his deed, the HOA bylaws, and the architectural approval documentation he had received years ago for his battery cabinet. He walked into the HOA clubhouse where Karen was holding court with 2 other board members and dropped the documents onto the table. Karen raised an eyebrow and smiled thinly, pretending to be surprised. "Oh, Alex, we were just about to contact you. He calmly said you broke into my home and tampered with my property while I was at work. That's called criminal trespassing." Her face twitched slightly. "We acted in accordance with the community's emergency standards. There were multiple complaints." Alex pulled out his tablet and tapped the screen. The video of her giving instructions to the contractor began playing. Karen lunged to shut it off. One of the board members asked nervously when was this recorded. Karen, the other one, stared at the screen with a pale face. Alex said, "I haven't even started yet. This is just the trailer. The full feature's coming soon." Karen stammered about context and community safety, but it was clear her grip was slipping. Alex didn't push further. Not yet. He wanted her to feel the unraveling slowly. That night, Alex sat in his car across the street from his own home, watching from a secondary feed through a concealed camera still active in the exterior lighting fixture. Karen walked by his porch, inspecting it again with a flashlight, talking to someone on the phone. He couldn't hear her words, but her posture said everything. She was trying to control a situation that was already slipping out of her fingers. He opened a secure note file and began typing a list. Every violation she had committed, every misstep, every lie. He wasn't locked out anymore. He was just getting ready to open every single door she thought she had closed. The morning after the confrontation at the HOA clubhouse, Alex sat in his home office reviewing documents and sipping coffee, finally back inside his own house but far from satisfied. The deadbolt was gone, and his original smart locking system had been restored under police supervision the previous afternoon, but the damage wasn't just physical. Karen had crossed a line most people wouldn't dare approach, and the implications were deep. She had weaponized her position to invade his property and disrupt his life, all while pretending to represent the interests of the neighborhood. Alex had seen power abused before, but never so personally, and never this boldly. Now it was time to dismantle it piece by piece, starting with the lies that gave her a false sense of control. He pulled up the latest draft of the community bylaws and began combing through them line by line, cross-referencing them with the printed list of supposed violations Karen had handed him. The inconsistencies were laughable. One of the violations cited a fire code restriction for energy storage systems that only applied to commercial buildings. Another accused him of unauthorized security installations, even though the neighborhood had no rule forbidding personal surveillance unless it faced directly into another resident's window, which his cameras never did. He highlighted each fabricated claim and added footnotes sourced from county regulations and HOA resolutions, creating a folder that would later become the foundation of his defense and counteroffensive. He then turned his attention to something even more revealing: the voting records. According to the HOA's own digital archive, any enforcement action like property entry required a minimum of 3 board member votes in an official meeting. Alex accessed the online logs and was met with something peculiar. The timestamps were all identical down to the second. That would be impossible unless someone manually altered them or fabricated the entries entirely. He dug deeper. The emails used to vote in favor of the lockout came from similar addresses. Almost too similar. 2 of them ended in .info instead of the standard .org domain the HOA used. He cross-verified the domain registration. Both suspicious addresses were created just 3 weeks prior and registered to a private proxy shield. Classic move when someone didn't want their identity traced. Alex ran a diagnostic trace using one of his custom scripts, and to no surprise, both addresses pointed back to the same IP range as Karen's personal home network. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the screen, a slow grin forming on his face. She hadn't just bent the rules. She had committed digital forgery on an official governance system. That alone was grounds for removal, but it was also potentially criminal. He backed up the evidence, stored it on multiple encrypted drives, and emailed a copy to his lawyer. Then he made a call to a friend from college, Riley, who now worked in private digital forensics and frequently consulted on HOA fraud investigations. When Riley heard the summary, he laughed for a solid minute before offering to assist pro bono just for the entertainment value. Riley said he'd generate a technical breakdown of the domain manipulation and timestamp anomalies within the week. Alex knew he'd get it in a day. By the afternoon, Alex was ready to take the next step. He returned to the HOA clubhouse, not to argue but to request the minutes from the meeting that allegedly authorized the lockout. Karen wasn't there. Instead, a nervous young board member named Lindsay greeted him, visibly uncomfortable. She handed him a folder with the printed meeting note. Alex scanned them quickly. As expected, they were vague, filled with generic language like resident safety and unauthorized equipment without naming him directly. He asked politely if she had voted to change his lock. She hesitated. Then she shook her head slowly and whispered that she didn't even know about it until it already happened. That confirmed everything. Karen had either forged the vote or bullied everyone into silence afterward. Either way, it was illegitimate. He left the clubhouse and walked across the lot to the community bulletin board where new policies were usually posted. There was nothing about emergency access authority. No notices. No resolution announcements. Just flyers for lawn care discounts and an upcoming Easter egg hunt. On his way back to his car, he bumped into Mr. Halvorsen, a retired engineer who had lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years. The man gave Alex a knowing look and said quietly that this wasn't the first time Karen had pulled something shady. A few months ago, she had issued a retroactive fine to a neighbor for having a bird feeder. When they refused to pay, their landscaping permit mysteriously got delayed until they gave in. Alex thanked him and kept walking. The cracks were widening. That evening, Alex sat down and activated the honeypot. It was a fake Wi-Fi network with an obvious name, HOA Access Control. It mimicked a weakly secured system that someone tech-savvy but arrogant would set up. It was bait. Karen had meddled with his hardware once already. If she, or someone acting for her, tried again, they'd see this tempting access point broadcasting from his property and think it was his main system. In truth, the honeypot was isolated and designed to log every device and action taken on it, down to the typing speed and connection path. Within 2 hours, someone had connected. The device was an older model Android tablet running outdated firmware. He probed for credentials, tried a few dictionary-based passwords, then attempted to upload a script called access_override.js. Alex watched the whole thing happen in real time and recorded every detail. The IP address traced back to the HOA clubhouse. Again. But this time, he had not just proof of break-in. He had evidence of unauthorized surveillance, digital intrusion, and an attempt to manipulate private systems. That night, he drove by the clubhouse and spotted lights on in the back room. From the shadows, he could see someone inside. He used a long-lens camera to snap a few photos. Karen's son, Dylan, seated at a desk with the same Android tablet on the table, talking on a headset and looking through documents. One of those documents had Alex's name on it in bold. They weren't just improvising. They were building something. A justification. A cover-up. Or worse, a fake security narrative. The final blow for the day came when Alex received an anonymous email from an address called Concerned Resident 124. It contained a screenshot of a group chat between Karen and several other board members where she bragged about removing the so-called tech nuisance and referred to Alex as a threat to the visual purity of the neighborhood. It was exactly the kind of language that would raise eyebrows if shown to the right people. Alex replied only once, "Thank you. You've helped more than you know." Then he copied the chat, archived it, and added it to his growing file labeled Karen Case. It was no longer about a lock. It was about the layers of power, control, and digital incompetence stacked on top of each other like a house of cards. And Alex knew exactly how to pull the bottom one out. Alex sat alone in his home office with the lights dimmed and the glow of his monitor painting soft blue shadows across the walls. The data from the honeypot continued to stream in, every keystroke and file request meticulously logged. The longer they poked around, the more they revealed. Whoever was trying to breach his fake system didn't realize how loud they were being in a digital sense. Their device ID had already been matched, and the log files even captured typing behavior. Fast, erratic, inconsistent, exactly like someone fumbling through something they didn't fully understand. And there was one detail Alex had intentionally embedded as bait. A file labeled HOA_access_codes.txt. Anyone with half a brain would know not to open something that obvious, but Dylan hadn't just opened it. He downloaded it to his device. That single click triggered a full location ping that confirmed what Alex had already suspected. The tablet was sitting in the back room of the HOA clubhouse. They were practically giving themselves away. But Alex wasn't going to report anything just yet. This wasn't about catching them in the act. It was about building a structure so airtight they'd have no way to slither out once the walls closed in. He printed out the interaction logs, the connection data, and the visual screenshots of the tablet's attempts to spoof credentials. He stapled them into a folder labeled Phase 2 and slid it into a drawer next to a flash drive holding every backup copy of the evidence. He wanted to make sure that when the time came, even if they tried to destroy everything, he could still burn them down with a single file. The next day, he returned to the neighborhood in full view, no more hiding, no more subtlety. He walked past Karen's house on purpose and gave her a courteous nod. She froze in her garden, shovel in hand, and barely nodded back. Her face held the tight expression of someone who'd lost control of a narrative she thought she owned. She wasn't smiling this time. There was no HOA clipboard in her hand. Just visible discomfort. Alex didn't say a word. Instead of confronting her, he spent the afternoon at a local print shop creating a single-page flyer that read in bold letters, "Do you know what your HOA board is really doing?" At the bottom, it listed a link to a private but publicly viewable folder containing documents that detailed unauthorized votes, fake violation letters, and tampering footage with full context. He didn't spam the neighborhood. He just put a single copy on the community bulletin board next to the HOA's calendar, and then went home. No confrontation, no drama. Just bait. And just like with the honeypot, someone took it. That evening, he got a ping from the file hosting service. The documents had been downloaded 3 times in under 15 minutes, all from IP addresses linked to the neighborhood. One of them belonged to Lindsay, the nervous board member who had given him the fake meeting notes. The other 2 were unknown, likely residents. Within the hour, he got a text from an unknown number. It said only one thing: "I didn't vote for anything. She's lying to all of us." Alex smiled. That was all he needed. Later that night, Karen made her move again. The honeypot logged a new connection, this time from a device labeled kwhitmore_iPad. The digital signature matched. She had tried accessing the false dashboard page, presumably hoping to find something incriminating she could turn back around on Alex. But there was nothing of value, only phony access logs designed to look suspicious. She clicked through every tab, unknowingly activating even more tracking scripts that sent every action to Alex's main server. When she tried to download another file marked resident surveillance plans.pdf, it triggered a silent alert. Alex watched in real time as she moved through the fake system, desperate for something she could twist into justification. But what she didn't realize was that the system had also recorded her voice. The tablet she had used didn't mute its microphone. Alex's code had activated an audio log the moment she accessed the site. The system captured fragments of her voice, saying phrases like "this'll shut him up" and "we'll say it was a safety threat." Her own words were now evidence, layered over the footage, digital tracing, and falsified records. And she had delivered it all herself. The next morning, Alex visited Riley's office downtown. Riley had spent the previous 2 days assembling a full forensic report. It was damning. The domain manipulations were amateurish. The timestamps had been altered using basic editing tools. The fraudulent HOA vote logs could easily be proven fake under the simplest scrutiny. And the forged HOA domains were registered under a proxy tied to Karen's billing address, thanks to a tiny oversight where she'd accidentally used the same recovery email for her fake board member accounts and a coupon app. Riley almost cried laughing when he found it. Alex packaged everything into a single press-style presentation. It had a clear narrative flow, complete with screenshots, side-by-side comparisons of real versus fake documents, and the recordings of Karen's own words. He uploaded it to a private share and scheduled it to automatically email every resident in the HOA directory on Friday at 7 p.m. sharp, the hour when most people were just starting their weekend and likely checking email. He included one final line in the message: "I was locked out, but now we all deserve to know who holds the key." Before Friday came, Alex paid one more visit to the HOA clubhouse. This time, he wasn't alone. His lawyer accompanied him, along with a representative from the county housing department. They had received his report and found enough preliminary cause to investigate potential misconduct. The moment Karen saw them walk in, her expression fell like a crumbling wall. The lawyer handed her a printed copy of the evidence and informed her of the formal complaint being filed. She tried to argue, but the representative silenced her with a simple phrase: "Until this is resolved, you are suspended from all HOA duties." Alex said nothing. He just watched. That night, he sat in his living room with Pixel curled beside him, watching the neighborhood emails explode one by one. Residents who had once ignored him were now replying with shock, anger, and disbelief. Some demanded a new election. Others wanted Karen reported to the police. A few even asked Alex to take over the HOA board. He didn't respond. Not yet. He wasn't interested in power. Just peace. He leaned back, stared at the ceiling, and let out a long exhale. Every move she made, every file she opened, every arrogant step she took to control him had led her straight into a trap she built herself. And now, she wasn't just losing her seat. She was losing the illusion of control she had clung to so tightly. Alex knew this wasn't over. But for the first time since the lock had clicked in his face, he felt like the doors were opening in his favor again. By Saturday morning, the HOA neighborhood was in chaos. The email Alex had scheduled the night before had done exactly what he hoped, and maybe even more. Some residents had barely waited 5 minutes after opening the attachment before they were calling emergency board meetings. Others were walking house to house with printed copies of the report, shaking their heads in disbelief. The entire illusion Karen had constructed was crumbling at every corner. Her carefully maintained persona as the community's strict but fair leader had been obliterated by cold evidence and her own digital footprints. Some people were shocked by the recordings. Others were furious about the manipulated votes and fake violations. But the thing that hit hardest was the realization that they had all been bullied, tricked, and governed by someone who never cared about fairness, only control. Alex kept a low profile that day, even though he received over a dozen messages thanking him for finally exposing what had been going on. Some neighbors who had barely spoken to him before now treated him like a hero. One even dropped off a pie with a note that said sorry for ever doubting you. He didn't gloat. He simply replied with a quiet appreciation and went back to reviewing the final pieces of his case. Because for Alex, the job wasn't done until the last lock had clicked into place. The digital evidence had been enough to trigger internal fallout. But what Karen needed now was a legal reckoning, one that would make sure she could never attempt this kind of manipulation again. And he had one more ace left to play. On Sunday afternoon, an inspector from the local code enforcement office, acting on the complaint filed with Alex's attorney, arrived to evaluate the HOA clubhouse. The inspection had been scheduled quietly, without notice to Karen, to avoid obstruction. Alex stood nearby in his car, watching discreetly as the inspector walked around the building with a clipboard, noting the obvious and the subtle. The improperly stored paint cans, the exposed wiring near the old fuse box, the storage closet packed to the ceiling with flammable materials and unsorted equipment. What made it worse was the folder on the table labeled Emergency Lockout Authority, which contained printed pages of fake policies, each stamped with a logo that didn't match the real HOA document. When asked, the remaining board members admitted they had never seen those files before. Karen had been creating her own HOA rulebook, using her office as a personal control center. The inspector documented everything and issued preliminary citations on the spot. The clubhouse was ordered to suspend any administrative operations until further review. Karen wasn't even present at the time. She was inside her house, blinds drawn, phone off, likely realizing that the walls were closing in faster than she could spin new lies. The news of the citations spread just as fast as the digital report had. Neighbors who had stayed silent now openly questioned every fine they'd ever paid, every violation they'd received. One older couple spoke up during a spontaneous resident gathering and revealed that Karen had forced them to remove their porch swing years ago, claiming it was a safety hazard. Turns out it had been within regulation the whole time. The remaining board members, feeling the pressure, called for an emergency vote of no confidence. With only a small fraction of residents needing to approve it, Karen was officially removed from the board within 48 hours. Her position dissolved, her authority stripped, her name erased from the current roster. But Alex wasn't done. He wanted to make sure that Karen didn't quietly regroup and find her way into another position of power through back channels or future manipulation. That meant putting the final nail in the coffin, public accountability. With his lawyer's guidance, Alex filed a civil suit that included invasion of privacy, unlawful entry, defamation, and digital fraud. He didn't want money. The suit was strategic. It allowed formal discovery, which meant Karen's devices and correspondence would have to be examined by legal forensics. Every deleted email, every file she thought she had hidden, every message between her and her son about their fake evidence attempts would now become part of public record. The suit also triggered immediate scrutiny from the HOA's parent association at the state level. They sent a representative to conduct interviews with residents, review governance practices, and ensure compliance with federal data handling laws. Because once Karen and Dylan began falsifying electronic records and using fake domains, they'd stepped into legal territory far more dangerous than HOA politics. And the kicker was, Karen had no idea just how traceable her actions were. One afternoon, Alex got a call from Riley, who was practically breathless with excitement. He had discovered that Karen's son had used a government discount to purchase surveillance tools for their fake operation, tools only approved for school or official civic use. He'd acquired them using credentials borrowed from an old acquaintance, forging a temporary identity that could lead to federal impersonation charges. Riley laughed and said they weren't just shooting themselves in the foot, they were walking through a minefield blindfolded. Alex thanked him and passed the discovery to his lawyer, who added it to the growing court file. The judge handling the civil case scheduled a preliminary hearing within the week. On the day of the hearing, Karen arrived dressed in formal clothes, flanked by a lawyer who looked like he'd been dragged into a nightmare he didn't fully understand. She avoided eye contact with everyone. Alex, calm and composed, brought only a slim binder and a flash drive. When the judge asked if there was any opening evidence, Alex played a short segment from the audio recording, Karen's voice clearly saying we'll say it was a safety threat, then instructing someone to disable the smart lock. That was all it took. The judge ordered that the case move forward with full discovery, noting that the initial evidence indicated a high probability of both civil misconduct and potential criminal investigation. After court, Alex walked out without saying a word to Karen. She didn't try to speak either. She looked smaller than he remembered, like the weight of being exposed had finally started sinking in. No arrogance, no clipboard, just silence. Outside, a small group of neighbors who had followed the case quietly clapped him on the back, saying they'd never seen someone take on an entire corrupt HOA machine and win. He smiled, not because he enjoyed the attention, but because it was over. The system that had betrayed him had now turned against the one who thought she controlled it. The locks had been changed once without his permission. Now every door she had slammed on others was swinging back hard. And Alex made sure the hinges would never be the same. The neighborhood that had once been quiet and stiff under Karen's iron grip was now in the middle of a transformation. The removal of her name from the HOA board wasn't just symbolic, it was a release. The community felt lighter, freer. Residents who had lived under her constant threat of citations and made up policies were finally beginning to trust each other again. Flower pots returned to front yards. Porch swings reappeared. Even a few lawn gnomes made a comeback, despite Karen's infamous rule about ornamental clutter. People smiled more often. Doors stayed open longer. But through it all, Alex kept to his rhythm. He hadn't asked for a spotlight, and even though it now followed him everywhere in the neighborhood, he treated it like he treated everything else, with quiet precision and a calm mind. His goal had never been power. It was justice, and that part of the mission was almost complete. Still, one final task remained. The civil case was moving swiftly, and discovery had revealed more than Alex could have hoped for. Karen's communications with Dylan included receipts for illegal data monitoring equipment, copies of altered board resolutions, and even drafts of fake violation letters with placeholder names, ready to be filled in and printed. The most damning piece was a voice memo between Karen and her son where she said, "If we can't make him move, we'll make him miserable." That sentence became the headline of the final legal summary submitted to the court. The judge, after reviewing the mountain of evidence, didn't just recommend full restitution. He referred parts of the case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges, especially related to forgery, fraud, and unlawful access of private data systems. The message couldn't have been clearer. Karen's days of operating behind fake authority were over. As the case gained local media traction, Alex began receiving emails and calls from other communities across the state. People wanted advice on how to deal with their own power-hungry HOA boards, how to protect their digital systems, how to install real security that couldn't be tampered with by the very people meant to uphold the rules. Some of them offered him consulting gigs. Others simply thanked him for proving that these neighborhood tyrants weren't untouchable. Alex helped where he could, but always kept the focus on empowering residents to organize, document, and fight back with truth, not chaos. Back at home, a new HOA board was forming. After Karen's expulsion, the community organized a special election. Neighbors kept pushing Alex to run, but he declined every time with the same line, "I just want to live in peace." Instead, he nominated Mrs. Jenkins, a retired school principal known for her no-nonsense fairness and her ability to listen without bias. She won almost unanimously. Under her leadership, the new board focused on transparency. They created a shared online portal where meeting minutes were updated in real time, and any resident could submit proposals or concerns without fear of retaliation. Violation notices were now accompanied by photographs, timestamps, and an appeals process. No more mystery fines. No more midnight threats. 1 week after the new board was sworn in, they held a community potluck. Alex attended, reluctantly at first, but gradually eased into the gathering. People thanked him over barbecue ribs and lemonade. Kids ran past him laughing, and for the first time in months, he saw his neighborhood as it had once been when he moved in, full of potential. A few residents asked if he'd ever consider teaching a digital security workshop. He said maybe, and they all seemed excited by the idea. That night, he walked home just as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, casting long, golden shadows across the sidewalk. It was quiet again, but this time it was the good kind of quiet. Karen, meanwhile, had gone almost entirely silent. She stayed indoors, her front yard growing unkempt and uncharacteristically messy. The woman who used to patrol the street with a measuring tape and clipboard now kept her curtains drawn and her mailbox overflowing. The new HOA board had issued her a formal notice to remove unpermitted surveillance equipment from her property. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. According to public records, she was also under audit by the state-level HOA Compliance Bureau and had pending criminal charges for document forgery. Her son had left town, possibly to avoid further scrutiny. The empire they built on fake power had completely collapsed, and now it stood as a cautionary tale. Alex's house had become the safest one on the block, not just because of his advanced systems, but because the neighborhood now knew that if anyone tried anything shady, they wouldn't get away with it. His network of sensors, cameras, and off-site backups quietly did their job while he went about his day in peace. One evening, he installed the final component in his system upgrade, a discrete voice access panel integrated with facial recognition. When he walked up to his door that night, the panel scanned his face, pinged softly, and greeted him with a simple welcome back, Alec. It was more than a security feature. It was a reminder that this home was truly his again, in every way that mattered. As spring gave way to summer, Alex continued working remotely, enjoying his mornings with a cup of coffee and Pixel curled up beside his keyboard. He'd occasionally glance at the corner of his screen, where the live feed of his porch remained stable and untouched. There were no more surprise visits, no unexpected citations. No one dared tamper with anything, not out of fear, but out of respect. Word had spread. This wasn't just another tech guy. This was the one who built the system, got locked out of his own house, and still managed to beat the people who thought they controlled the keys. And now, every door he walked through opened on his terms. One afternoon, Mrs. Jenkins dropped by with a thank you basket and an envelope. Inside was a letter signed by dozens of residents, expressing their gratitude for what he'd done. Along with it was a certificate that read Honorary Advisor to the HOA Board. It was symbolic, of course. He had no voting power, no official title. But that was exactly how he liked it. He pinned the letter on his wall and tucked the certificate away in a drawer. He didn't need to frame it. His satisfaction came not from titles or praise, but from the knowledge that he had taken back what was his and helped others do the same. As the sun set over the neighborhood and the streetlights blinked on one by one, Alex stood on his porch, arms crossed, watching the world he helped restore settle into calm. For the first time in a long while, he had nothing left to monitor, no new intrusion to prepare for, no threat looming on the edge of his network. Just a breeze in the air, the distant laughter of kids on bikes, and the peaceful click of a door that now locked and unlocked only for him.